Before this day fully unfolds, there is something you need to recognize. The change approaching your life is not beginning in the heavens alone. It is already moving through your inner world, threading itself through old memories, unfinished conversations, fragile relationships, and emotional stories that have remained hidden beneath layers of control and routine. Long before most people realize what is happening, the atmosphere around them is already transforming. At 8 o'clock this morning, Mercury, the planet connected to thought, language, communication, and every exchange between human beings, enters Cancer. On the surface, this may sound like another routine astrological event. It is not. This marks the beginning of a profound shift in the way emotions and words interact. The conversations that have been postponed, the truths that have been swallowed, and the feelings that have been buried beneath practical responsibilities are no longer willing to remain silent. Perhaps recently you have felt a strange urge to reconnect with someone you have not spoken to in a long time. Maybe a memory keeps returning without explanation. Perhaps there is a conversation from your past that refuses to leave your mind no matter how hard you try to focus elsewhere. If that sounds familiar, understand that there is a reason. What is unfolding now has been building beneath the surface for far longer than you realize. Later, the deeper purpose behind this pull becomes clearer, but first you need to understand the larger story developing around you. The coming 2 weeks are not simply about communication. They are about emotional accountability. They are about confronting feelings that have remained unresolved for months, and in some cases, for years. For 4 specific zodiac signs, words of apology are moving closer. Not casual apologies, not empty phrases spoken out of obligation. These are the kinds of admissions that alter the emotional foundation of relationships. These are the kinds of conversations that reshape family dynamics, restore trust, and create a sense of safety where uncertainty once existed. For some people, the healing that follows may reach wounds they believed had already healed, only to discover those wounds were still quietly influencing every decision they made. Even now, while you are listening to this message, the energetic structure surrounding your relationships is changing. Emotional barriers that once felt permanent are beginning to weaken. Defenses that have protected people from vulnerability are losing strength. Words that remain trapped behind fear, pride, guilt, or regret are gathering pressure. And soon, that pressure becomes impossible to contain. What makes this story even more remarkable is that the healing process actually begins before Mercury enters Cancer. Most people will miss this entirely. At 8:30 this evening, only hours before Mercury changes signs, Mercury forms an exact alignment with Chiron, the wounded healer, while both occupy the final degree of their respective signs. This detail matters enormously. They meet at the 29th degree, often called the anaretic degree, a point associated with urgency, culmination, and irreversible transition. Symbolically, it resembles standing at the threshold between an old chapter and a new one. There is a brief moment where you can still look backward, but you already know there is no returning to the life you had before. That is the energy surrounding tonight. This alignment creates a final opportunity for truth to emerge before Mercury enters the deeply emotional waters of Cancer. It is the last moment where communication remains primarily intellectual before emotion takes control of the narrative. Imagine holding something inside for years. Imagine carrying a truth so long that it becomes part of your identity. Then suddenly, circumstances force that truth to the surface. That is the atmosphere created by Mercury and Chiron. Chiron symbolizes the wound that never completely disappears. It represents the part of your story that shaped you, the insecurity you learned to hide, the rejection you learned to live with, the emotional scar you rarely discuss because you have convinced yourself there is no point revisiting it. Yet tonight, Mercury shines a light directly onto that place. The wound receives a voice. Pain that has existed in silence seeks expression. Experiences that have never been fully acknowledged demand recognition. This process is not particularly comfortable. In fact, for many people, it may feel startlingly intense. Honest words may emerge unexpectedly. Conversations may become more revealing than anticipated. Emotions that seemed manageable may suddenly become impossible to suppress. If you catch yourself saying things you never planned to say, if years of frustration suddenly find language, if you feel an overwhelming need to explain exactly how someone affected you, understand that there is a larger pattern unfolding. Nothing about that moment is random. The wound is being named because it is preparing to leave. The pain is becoming visible because visibility is the first step toward release. And then morning arrives. At exactly 8 o'clock this morning, Mercury enters Cancer at 0 degrees and 0 minutes. The transition is immediate. This is not a gradual adjustment. It is more like a switch being flipped inside the collective emotional landscape. Mercury represents the mind. Cancer is ruled by the moon. The moon operates differently from logic. It evaluates experience through feeling. It asks questions that facts alone cannot answer. Does this feel safe? Does this feel genuine? Does this feel emotionally true? As Mercury moves into Cancer, communication begins responding to those questions. Suddenly, words alone are no longer enough. People become sensitive to tone. Silence becomes meaningful. A pause in conversation carries as much weight as a spoken sentence. Subtle emotional signals become impossible to ignore. You may notice yourself paying less attention to what people claim and more attention to how their presence affects you. The body becomes extraordinarily perceptive during this transit. Intuition strengthens. Emotional awareness sharpens. Reactions that once seemed difficult to explain begin making perfect sense. Someone's story may sound convincing, yet something inside you feels unsettled. Another person's words may be simple, yet their sincerity feels undeniable, and that inner response becomes your compass. The remarkable part is that this instinctive perception is often correct under Mercury in Cancer. Communication shifts beyond language. Feelings become information. Energy becomes information. Emotional authenticity becomes information. The hidden message becomes more important than the spoken message. The emotion behind the words becomes more important than the words themselves. And this is why the coming apologies carry such significance. During this transit, nobody can hide behind rehearsed statements or carefully crafted explanations. Any apology lacking genuine emotional openness will immediately reveal its emptiness. People will sense it. They will feel it. The heart will recognize the difference between true vulnerability and performance. That realization marks the beginning of everything that follows. Because once emotional truth becomes impossible to hide, an entirely new chapter begins to unfold. Pay attention, because the period that begins now carries far more significance than most people realize. The next 2 weeks are not merely another chapter in a passing astrological cycle. They represent a rare emotional crossroads where empty gestures lose their power and genuine vulnerability becomes impossible to ignore. This is the stretch of time when rehearsed words collapse under their own weight, while sincere expressions of remorse, truth, and understanding arrive with such emotional force that they can permanently reshape the foundation of a relationship. Conversations that once skimmed across the surface suddenly descend into places neither person has been willing to explore. What was once avoided becomes unavoidable. What was once hidden begins asking to be seen. And now we return to the question that has likely been lingering in the back of your mind since the beginning. Why can you not stop thinking about that particular person? Why does their name continue appearing without invitation? Why do memories you thought were settled suddenly feel alive again? The answer lies within Mercury's journey through Cancer. This transit does not simply influence the way you communicate with people around you. It reaches backward through time. It opens doors to emotional rooms you have not visited in years. Cancer governs memory, family history, emotional roots, childhood experiences, and the invisible threads connecting your present self to everything that came before. When Mercury enters this deeply reflective sign, the mind becomes less interested in what is happening today, and more interested in understanding what still remains unresolved from yesterday. You may notice yourself drifting toward old photographs without fully understanding why. Familiar streets may suddenly trigger powerful emotions. Places that once seemed ordinary become loaded with significance. Conversations from years ago return with astonishing clarity. Words someone spoke a decade earlier may echo in your mind with the same emotional intensity they carried when you first heard them. At first, it may seem as though you are becoming trapped in old memories. You are not. This is not regression. This is preparation. There is an enormous difference between living in the past and revisiting the past for healing. During Mercury's passage through Cancer, the psyche begins identifying emotional stories that remain unfinished. It searches for chapters that were never properly closed. It recognizes connections that ended externally, but never reached emotional completion internally. That is why these memories feel so vivid. That is why certain people keep appearing in your thoughts. Your inner world is preparing itself for resolution. Many of the conversations capable of creating profound healing are connected to individuals you believed were no longer relevant to your life. The person whose words left a lasting wound may reappear. Someone connected to your childhood may suddenly reach out. A relationship that seemed permanently buried may resurface unexpectedly. In some cases, the apology you have spent years waiting to hear may arrive from someone who has been absent for most of your life. In other cases, the healing conversation is not directed toward another person at all. Sometimes the reconciliation occurs within. Sometimes the apology that changes everything is one you offer to the younger version of yourself who carried pain, rejection, guilt, or loneliness, without ever receiving the understanding they deserved. And this is where things become especially important. Long before your conscious mind understands who requires attention, your body already knows. The nervous energy you cannot explain, the recurring memory that refuses to disappear, the face that keeps appearing without warning, the feeling that there is something unfinished. These signals are not random mental noise. They are indicators that deeper emotional intelligence is already recognizing where healing wants to occur. It is as though the universe is quietly arranging the stage before the actors step into view. The pieces are moving into position. The people involved may not even realize it yet, but the process of reconciliation has already begun beneath the surface. Then we arrive at June 2nd, a date that introduces an entirely different kind of energy into this unfolding story. Only one day after Mercury enters Cancer, the Sun forms a powerful alignment with Saturn. This matters because emotional breakthroughs require more than feeling. They require stability. Without stability, emotions become overwhelming. Without stability, vulnerability turns into panic. Without stability, difficult conversations collapse under the weight of fear. The Sun-Saturn alignment provides exactly what is needed. Saturn represents maturity, responsibility, structure, and emotional endurance. It is the part of you capable of remaining present when discomfort appears. It is the voice that encourages accountability instead of avoidance. It is the strength that allows someone to remain open rather than running from difficult truths. When the Sun aligns with Saturn, there is a grounding effect that spreads through the collective emotional atmosphere. The ego becomes less defensive. The need to protect one's image becomes less urgent. The desire to blame others weakens. Instead, a new kind of courage emerges. The courage to admit mistakes. The courage to acknowledge harm. the courage to take responsibility without feeling destroyed by it. This becomes one of the most important gifts of June 2nd. When emotions intensify, people often move toward one of two extremes. They either shut down completely or become consumed by shame. Both reactions create distance. Both prevent authentic healing. Yet the Sun-Saturn alignment offers another path. It allows you to say the difficult words while remaining emotionally centered. It allows you to look someone in the eyes and admit where you fell short. It allows accountability to exist without self-punishment. If there is a conversation you have been avoiding because vulnerability feels terrifying, this is the energy that supports you. This is the moment when you begin realizing that honesty does not weaken your identity. It strengthens it. You discover that acknowledging a mistake does not reduce your value. It reveals your growth. It demonstrates your maturity. It shows that you are no longer trapped by old versions of yourself. And then the energy builds even further as June 3rd arrives. This is where the story reaches an entirely different level of significance. Because June 3rd contains one of the most remarkable combinations of the entire Mercury in Cancer transit. Two major astrological alignments occur within hours of one another, creating conditions that support conversations capable of changing the trajectory of relationships, emotional patterns, and future possibilities. The first occurs at 7 o'clock in the evening when Mercury forms a perfect trine to the North Node in Pisces. This is not ordinary communication energy. The North Node represents growth, purpose, destiny, and the evolutionary direction of the soul. It symbolizes where life is encouraging you to move, even when that direction feels unfamiliar. It points toward the experiences necessary for deeper fulfillment and spiritual development. When Mercury forms a harmonious trine to this point, words become vehicles for destiny. Communication becomes aligned with growth. The conversations taking place under this influence often feel larger than the individuals participating in them. People find themselves speaking truths they have carried for years. Insights emerge unexpectedly. Messages arrive at exactly the right moment. What is said carries unusual significance because it touches something much deeper than surface-level circumstances. An apology offered during this alignment may resolve the conflict in the present, but it often feels as though something far older is also being released. Long-standing emotional patterns begin closing. Unfinished chapters finally reach completion. There can be moments where you hear yourself speaking and realize the words seem to originate from somewhere beyond ordinary thought. It may feel as though your soul has been waiting patiently for this exact moment, waiting for the perfect alignment, waiting for the perfect opening, waiting for the opportunity to finally express a truth that has lived silently within you for far longer than you ever realized. And what follows next may become the turning point that changes everything. This is where the story moves beyond ordinary reconciliation and enters territory that feels almost destined. June 3rd is not simply about hearing an apology or offering one. It is about witnessing how a single moment of honesty can unlock emotional patterns that have existed far longer than the current situation itself. There are times when a conversation resolves a disagreement. Then there are times when a conversation seems to reach through generations, touching wounds, beliefs, and emotional habits that have been quietly passed down for years. This is one of those moments. Under the influence of Mercury's harmonious connection to the North Node in Pisces, the words spoken carry extraordinary weight. The simple phrase, "I am sorry," becomes something much larger than a social courtesy. It becomes a doorway. It becomes a turning point. It becomes the key that opens emotional rooms that have remained sealed for far too long. Forgiveness no longer emerges from pride, obligation, or the desire to move on. Instead, it rises from a much deeper place, a place where the soul recognizes lessons that the mind alone could never fully understand. In that moment, people begin seeing their stories differently. They begin recognizing that pain often travels through families, relationships, and generations, until someone becomes courageous enough to stop the cycle. Yet just as this profound opening begins to unfold, another astrological force enters the picture, and this is where the energy becomes truly fascinating. Less than 2 hours after Mercury forms its trine to the North Node, Mercury moves into a square with Neptune. Under ordinary circumstances, this aspect is rarely considered comfortable. Neptune is the great dissolver, the force that blurs lines, softens certainty, and washes away the clear distinctions that logic depends upon. It is associated with confusion, uncertainty, misunderstandings, and situations where facts become difficult to separate from feelings. Normally, people approach Mercury square, Neptune with caution, because it can make communication feel slippery and unpredictable. Yet within the context of everything unfolding on June 3rd, this aspect becomes an unexpected gift. It creates exactly the conditions required for genuine healing to occur. Here is why. Human beings are remarkably skilled at defending their emotional pain with intellectual arguments. We create explanations for why we are justified in staying angry. We build elaborate stories proving why we are right and someone else is wrong. We construct protective walls out of logic, evidence, and carefully rehearsed narratives. Over time, those defenses become so familiar that we stop questioning them. We assume they are truth, when in reality they are often shields protecting vulnerable emotions underneath. Neptune changes that. When Mercury squares Neptune, those carefully constructed defenses begin to dissolve. Rational explanations lose their grip. Old arguments suddenly feel less convincing. The reasons you have repeated to yourself for years start losing their power. It becomes difficult to maintain the same level of certainty about who deserves blame and who deserves forgiveness. The emotional tide rises and washes over every rigid conclusion. In many ways, it resembles standing at the shoreline and watching waves erase footprints that once seemed permanent. The harder you try to cling to absolute certainty, the faster it slips away. And while this may initially feel disorienting, something remarkable happens within that uncertainty. You stop focusing on winning. You stop focusing on proving a point. You stop obsessing over who was correct. Instead, your attention shifts toward understanding, toward connection, toward compassion. The barriers separating people begin disappearing, not because anyone consciously lowers them, but because Neptune quietly dissolves them from the inside out. Suddenly, it becomes possible to look beyond the details of a disagreement and see the pain that created it. You begin recognizing the fear beneath someone's anger, the loneliness beneath their defensiveness, the heartbreak beneath their mistakes. This does not erase accountability. It simply creates enough empathy for healing to become possible. The process is rarely neat. It can feel confusing. Emotions may rise unexpectedly. Clarity may come in waves rather than straight lines. Yet within that uncertainty lies enormous transformative power. Because sometimes true forgiveness requires letting go of the need to fully understand every detail before opening your heart. As this powerful combination unfolds, everyone will feel its influence to some degree. However, 4 signs stand directly in the center of this emotional transformation. These are the cardinal signs: Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. Astrologers refer to these signs as forming the cardinal cross, a powerful energetic structure that becomes highly activated when Mercury travels through Cancer. Because of the angles involved, these signs experience the transit with greater intensity, greater urgency, and greater visibility than others. For them, the healing conversations are not subtle background experiences. They arrive directly, powerfully, and in ways that cannot be ignored. Cancer, your experience sits at the very heart of this story. Mercury is moving through your sign and illuminating your first house of identity, self-expression, and personal truth. For a long time, you may have carried feelings that remained hidden beneath layers of protection. You learned how to guard yourself. You learned how to survive disappointment. You learned how to keep certain emotions locked away where nobody could reach them. But now something changes. Your voice begins returning. The feelings that once felt too vulnerable to share suddenly seek expression. The emotional truths you have protected for so long begin moving toward the surface. One of the most powerful possibilities during this transit is receiving an apology that directly acknowledges pain you believed nobody understood. It is the kind of validation that reaches places inside you that have felt unseen for years. When it arrives, the healing extends beyond the relationship itself. It touches your entire understanding of your emotional nature. You begin realizing that your sensitivity is not a flaw. Your depth is not a burden. Your capacity to feel deeply is not something that needs to be hidden. Instead, it becomes clear that this emotional awareness has always been one of your greatest strengths. Aries, the focus shifts toward your fourth house, the realm of home, family, emotional roots, and personal foundations. While your energy naturally moves forward, this transit asks you to pause and look backward. The conversations arriving now are deeply personal. They take place away from public attention and often involve the people who shaped your earliest understanding of safety, belonging, and love. For some Aries individuals, this period may involve recognizing moments when impatience, frustration, or relentless forward motion created emotional distance within family relationships. There may be apologies that need to be offered. There may also be apologies that finally arrive from those who influenced your life long ago. In many cases, these conversations connect directly to childhood experiences and long-standing family dynamics. The healing taking place here is not superficial. It reaches the emotional foundation upon which everything else in your life is built. As that foundation strengthens, every other area of life benefits as well. Libra, this transit activates your 10th house, the area connected to career, reputation, public identity, and relationships with authority figures. Your challenge is different, but equally profound. For years, many Libras have become experts at maintaining balance, smoothing conflict, and ensuring that everyone around them feels comfortable. Yet in the process, an important question often remains unanswered. What about your own emotional needs? What about your own truth? Mercury, moving through Cancer, begins confronting that question directly. The healing conversation arriving for you may occur in professional environments, leadership situations, or relationships involving responsibility and power dynamics. You are being encouraged to stop hiding behind diplomacy when honesty is required. Boundaries become necessary. Emotional authenticity becomes necessary. There comes a moment when you recognize how often you have prioritized peace over self-respect. And when you finally acknowledge that reality, when you stop abandoning your own feelings to preserve harmony for everyone else, a profound shift occurs. The relationship with yourself begins healing, and that healing changes everything around you. Capricorn, your experience unfolds within the 7th house of partnerships, where the next chapter of this story is only beginning to reveal itself. Capricorn, this chapter reaches directly into your 7th house of partnerships, and that means the transformations arriving now are impossible to separate from the people closest to you. Whether those connections are romantic, marital, professional, or deeply personal, they are preparing to undergo a profound emotional reconstruction. For a long time, you have approached relationships through the lens of responsibility, consistency, and practical commitment. You have worked hard to create stability. You have focused on reliability. You have often believed that showing up, solving problems, and carrying burdens was the purest expression of love you could offer. Yet beneath that structure, beneath all the effort and discipline, there has been something quietly missing. The people closest to you may have felt cared for, but not fully felt. They may have respected your strength, while secretly longing for your vulnerability. They may have appreciated your dependability, while wishing they could access the emotions hidden behind your carefully maintained composure. Mercury moving through Cancer begins exposing that gap. The conversation capable of creating healing is not about fixing another problem or finding another solution. It is about lowering the walls that have protected you for so long. It is about allowing another person to witness the parts of yourself you normally keep hidden. For some Capricorns, this may involve hearing someone say they felt emotionally abandoned, even while you were physically present. For others, it may involve finally admitting that you have been carrying fears, doubts, or insecurities you never allowed anyone to see. The breakthrough occurs when control is replaced with honesty. The healing begins when emotional transparency becomes more important than maintaining an image of strength. If the words, "I am sorry for not being emotionally available," enter the conversation from either side, the intimacy that follows has the potential to transform the entire relationship. What emerges afterward is not simply reconciliation. It is a deeper level of trust than either person believed possible. Then, after days of emotional intensity, after tears, revelations, confessions, and conversations that reach places untouched for years, a new energy arrives. June 9th enters like a deep breath after a storm. It arrives like sunlight breaking through clouds that have covered the horizon for far too long. On this day, Venus and Jupiter unite in Cancer at 25 degrees, creating one of the most supportive and heart-centered alignments available. The timing is significant because this conjunction arrives only after all the difficult emotional work has already begun. It is not a shortcut. It is not a reward given without effort. It is the natural result of choosing honesty when avoidance would have been easier. Venus governs love, connection, affection, and harmony. Jupiter expands whatever it touches, bringing growth, generosity, blessings, and emotional abundance. When these two planets come together in Cancer, the sign most closely associated with emotional security and nurturing bonds, the atmosphere becomes remarkably restorative. Relationships that survived uncomfortable truths suddenly begin softening. The tension that once dominated interactions starts fading. Compassion replaces defensiveness. Tenderness returns where resentment once lived. Trust begins rebuilding itself brick by brick. It may feel as though the universe is acknowledging the courage required to face difficult emotions and offering reassurance that the effort was worthwhile. For many people, this becomes the moment they finally feel safe again. Old wounds stop defining every interaction. Love gains room to breathe. Emotional security begins replacing emotional uncertainty. What develops now is not merely a repaired relationship. It is a stronger foundation than the one that existed before the conflict ever began. Yet healing alone is never enough to sustain long-term change. Every breakthrough requires structure. Every reconciliation requires commitment. This brings us to June 10th, when Mercury forms a square to Saturn. At first glance, this energy may seem heavier than the warmth of the previous day. The emotional flow slows. Reality demands attention. Practical matters rise to the surface. But this shift is not a setback. It is an essential part of the process. Because forgiveness without accountability rarely lasts. Emotional breakthroughs without behavioral changes often collapse under the weight of old habits. The Mercury-Saturn square asks the difficult but necessary questions. What needs to change moving forward? Which patterns can no longer continue? What boundaries need to be established? What expectations need to be clarified? These conversations may not feel romantic. They may not feel inspiring. Yet they are often the most important discussions of the entire cycle. This is where promises become plans. This is where intentions become commitments. This is where emotional healing gains the structure necessary to survive. Saturn's influence encourages maturity. It insists that love must be supported by responsibility. It reminds everyone involved that real transformation is measured not by words alone, but by consistent action over time. In this context, Saturn becomes an ally rather than an obstacle. It ensures that the healing taking place has roots strong enough to endure future challenges. Still, even this is not the conclusion of the story. In many ways, it is only the opening chapter. One of the most important details arrives later in the month, when Mercury stations retrograde at 26 degrees Cancer. This event changes the entire perspective on everything that occurred during the first 10 days of June. Retrogrades are periods of review, reflection, reassessment, and re-evaluation. They invite people to revisit experiences and determine whether lasting change has truly occurred. Every conversation initiated during early June, every apology offered, every promise made, every emotional breakthrough achieved, all of it returns for examination. The retrograde asks difficult questions. Were those words sincere? Did the behavior actually change? Was the healing authentic or merely temporary? Did both people commit to growth, or did they simply enjoy the emotional relief of the moment? For those who approach these conversations with honesty and genuine effort, the retrograde becomes an opportunity to strengthen what has already been built. Their relationships deepen, their trust grows, their emotional bonds become more resilient. But for those who relied on surface-level gestures without meaningful change, the retrograde exposes the weakness in the foundation. Old issues return. Unresolved patterns resurface. The lessons that were ignored demand attention once again. This is why the choices made during early June carry such significance. They create the blueprint for everything that follows. At the same time, there is another layer to Mercury's journey through Cancer that extends beyond major apologies and life-changing conversations. Something more subtle begins happening within your everyday interactions. Your entire communication style starts evolving. You may notice yourself speaking with greater care. You become more aware of the emotional impact your words create. Conversations slow down. Listening becomes more important. You find yourself paying attention not only to what is being said, but also to how it feels. Emotional awareness begins guiding communication in ways that logic alone never could. Casual exchanges may feel strangely unsatisfying. Superficial interactions lose their appeal. There is a growing desire for authenticity, depth, and emotional substance. It becomes increasingly difficult to engage in conversations that lack genuine meaning. Mercury in Cancer naturally seeks emotional truth. If a discussion does not carry significance, it begins feeling like background noise. Many people will also notice their emotional sensitivity increasing. Statements that once seemed ordinary suddenly carry unexpected impact. Expressions of gratitude feel more powerful. Genuine affection feels more moving. Simple words can trigger profound emotional responses because you are no longer processing communication exclusively through the mind. You are experiencing it through the heart. This heightened sensitivity is not a weakness. It is evidence of deeper attunement. It reflects an increased ability to perceive emotional realities that often remain hidden beneath surface language. You begin hearing what people truly mean, rather than only what they say. This is why every word spoken between now and the end of June carries extraordinary importance. Words become seeds. They become energetic imprints shaping the future direction of relationships. The conversations occurring now will continue echoing long after the transit itself has passed. The apology offered next week. The boundary established on June 10th. The vulnerable truth shared during a difficult moment. These experiences are not isolated events. They are actively writing the next chapter of your life. Months from now, many people will look back and recognize this period as the moment everything changed. The moment old emotional cycles finally ended. The moment healing that once seemed impossible became real. And so we arrive at the threshold where this journey began. At 8 o'clock this morning, the portal opened. An invitation was extended. Not an invitation to perfection, but an invitation to honesty. An invitation to say the words that have remained trapped inside. An invitation to hear the apology you thought might never come. An invitation to finally address wounds that have quietly influenced your life for far too long. Yet every invitation exists within a limited window. The extraordinary support surrounding these conversations will not remain forever. The alignments creating these opportunities are temporary. The choice belongs entirely to you. You can dismiss the experience, continue pretending nothing requires attention, and allow old patterns to remain untouched. Or you can lean toward the discomfort. You can initiate the conversation. You can lower your defenses. You can allow yourself to be fully seen. The universe has assembled the conditions. The door is standing open. What waits on the other side is a version of your relationships built not upon performance, avoidance, or emotional distance, but upon truth, vulnerability, and genuine connection. The only remaining question is whether you're willing to speak the words that make that future possible. If you enjoyed this message, thank you for spending this time here. Your support means more than you know. Feel free to share your experiences and reflections below. Until next time, take care of yourself and stay open to the conversations that have the power to change everything.